transparency has been used. I think the ranking member said that we do need increased transparency at the EPA, and boy, do we need it. Congresswoman Clark said, boy, we need increased transparency at the EPA. Representative DeLauro said, transparency at the EPA. We need more transparency at the EPA. But when we have a rule that talks about transparency, we don't want transparency in this area. We don't want transparency so that we know what studies were used and how they were used and how they came about, so that if someone decided that they wanted to try to reproduce those studies, not by dropping a nuclear bomb to find out what effect radiation had on people. I mean, that's just an absurd argument. You would not go out and try to do some of the health studies and reproduce them and make people sick to see if they were true. But when you want to look at science and you want to say, what's the effect of this chemical on the environment? What science was used to determine how that affects human health or other types of things? Is it something that can be reproduced? Or is it something we should not reproduce and take the results? In some cases, that would be the case. But the basis of science is that I can come up with something and a result, and someone else can do the same types of studies that I have done and come up with the same result. The problem you have right now is the EPA doesn't do science. The EPA listens and looks at reports that have done by other science in other areas, and we have no idea why they select some science and why they reject other science. I have had industry after industry after industry come in and say, we don't know where this came from. We don't know how they came up with these conclusions. We would like to be able to find out if it's true. We don't know, but we don't think it is because we have no idea how they came up with this. All this rule says is that things will be kept confidential that are consistent with the statutory requirements for protection of privacy and confidentiality of research participants, protection of proprietary data, confidential business information, and other compelling interests. That will be kept confidential. But the public has a right to know, i.e. transparency, where some of this science comes from. I'm not rejecting the science. I'm just saying that we have a right to know. That's called transparency. That's what you all are for. Reject this amendment.
Thank the gentleman for his comments. Mr. Quigley is recognized.
I believe he said it best. Industry after industry have come to you and talked about this. I want to know who from the academic science world has come to you with this, because the last time we counted, it was over 12,000. I'm sure it's much higher than now. And the words matter. Peer-reviewed scientific studies that say that climate change is real and that man contributes to it. So you want to go through all 12,000 or more and say, we're going to question all this. Because all it is you got the blinders on, because respectfully, no one in particular, generally, the administration has made up its mind that they don't want to address climate change and that we're the only country in the world that's not part of the Paris Agreement, because we're doing it on our own, because we just know better. We just question science. There are, a handful of similar studies that say just the opposite, versus 12,000. But you know better, and we really want transparency unless it's looking closer at what Pruitt's doing, traveling all over the world. So you've got to trust science at some point in time. They're the ones that operate on you. They're the ones that design, through engineering, our buildings. But when it's selective, when it's just inconvenient for you, we're not going to trust it now. And I'll tell you what, we'll make it all about transparency. This is the last generation that we're going to have that can do something about climate change. We'll face this as time goes on.
Thank you, Mr. Whitten. Mr. Fleischman is recognized, and we're going to go to Mr. Price to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield my time to the distinguished chairman from Idaho.
I just want to respond to what the gentleman from Illinois was saying. I don't understand what you're afraid of. Why are you afraid to have the public know where this science came from?
Are you asking me? Can I?
No, I'm not asking you.
It sounds like you.
The gentleman
said-
from Idaho controls the time.
I think you just said that. I said that
Mr. Fleischman.
organization and organization and organization have come
Industry.
to me, and researchers have come to me too, that wonder where the science comes from. All we're asking is, where the hell does this science come from? Why have you accepted some science and rejected other science? Wouldn't that be interesting to know? Why are you afraid of that? I don't understand that. I don't reject the idea of climate change, so don't throw that on me. All I'm saying is, let's have transparency. And for a party that sat here and talked about transparency for the last 4.5 hours, maybe you ought to accept your own words and go for transparency. That's all we're asking for. We're not asking you to accept any science or reject any science. So let us know where it came from. Boy, that'd be horrible.
The gentleman, Mr. Rippersberger. You want to yield to Mr. Quigley?
Mr. Chairman, and I greatly appreciate this. Bring next meeting the scientific peer-reviewed studies you got that says that climate change isn't real. You're afraid of it. I'm speaking to all of you who don't support what we're trying to do with climate change. Compare it to the volumes of peer-reviewed. That's really important. Someone has actually analyzed that. Scientific studies by people we trust in the world to this. Who's afraid of that? Not us. We're trying to address it. Again, President Obama said, and that's what you hate to hear, this is the first generation feeling the effects of climate change. It's the last one that can do anything about it. We can't escape history. Respectfully, if it's possible to say that with this much at stake, it's on your hands.
The gentleman, Mr. Price, has a minute to close. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in my previous life, I was in academia and was involved both in peer reviewing articles and in having my articles peer reviewed. I can assure you nothing like this EPA rule is required by scientific journals. Nothing of the kind. Now, I'll also take a backseat to no one in supporting robust scientific debate. And the Harvard School of Public Health 6 cities study has been the basis for a great deal of discussion and some regulatory enactments. Let's have a robust exchange of studies and hypotheses, testing them as far as we can. But let's not, under the guise of transparency, put requirements on a study like that or on researchers to engage in a huge data dump, which they probably cannot do, certainly cannot do it while still honoring confidentiality of private and business records, and that really was just a cover for a bureaucratic requirement that would eliminate lots of studies and the use of lots of studies. That's what this is about. Of course we favor scientific integrity. We stand up for the whistleblower provisions, for any kind of any kind of provision that's designed to detect fraud or misleading studies, and robust peer review. That's basic, and there's no reason for this additional EPA smokescreen to be thrown up, and that's why I'm proposing this amendment that we disallow it.
Thank you, Mr. Price. The questions on the Price amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. No. The opinion of the chair, the nays have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Mr. Kilmer is recognized with Ms. Herrera Butler, amendment proposed.
Thanks, Chairman. We have an amendment.
Would you consider it read?
I would.
Gentleman's recognized to present
Thanks,
his
Chairman.
amendment.
I'm proud to offer this amendment with my good friend and fellow Washingtonian,